Hey everyone! I thought it would be high time I make a video about a game which is very dear to me, namely Wurm Online. While I do so, let's go sailing so you can see the environment. Before I go into the reasons why I love Wurm so much, just a brief introduction to my gaming history so you can better appreciate why it's Wurm that I choose to spend my time in. I'm a gamer in my mid-40s and I've been obsessed with video games ever since I was little. Already as a kid, the place you'd most likely find me is at the arcade playing Pac-Man, Frogger and Galaga. That was back in the 80s. Fast forward to the 90s and by this time I was playing the awesome PC games we had back then. You other old folks out there will definitely feel nostalgic when I mention titles such as Civilization, Warcraft 1, 2 and 3, StarCraft and the Eye of the Beholder series, and of course the legendary Ultima games by Richard Garriott. It was in fact partially my love for the Ultima series that enticed me to try my first MMO, Ultima Online. UO actually was released way back in 1997, and if you ask me, I consider it to be the grandfather of the MMO game genre. And do you know that in fact Ultima Online is still up and running? Not bad! When UO released its first expansion, The Second Age, in 1999, that's when I joined in on the fun and have been hooked on MMOs ever since. Over the years I've been trying out many other MMOs as well, and although I have at least tested out most of them, there have only been a few which have held my interest for very long. I would always compare them to Ultima Online and be disappointed with how little they had to offer in comparison. The ones that did manage to keep me engaged, however, were for instance Dark Age of Camelot, Anarchy Online, EVE Online, Star Wars The Old Republic, Guild Wars 2, and of course being an old Blizzard and Warcraft fan, WoW was definitely one of the bigger titles which I spent time in. But regardless, it's been a long time since I felt as passionate about an MMO as I did about Ultima Online. That was until Wurm came along. So, what is Wurm Online anyhow? It's a sandbox MMO developed by a small company in Sweden called Code Club, and it first started off in 2003 with a couple of guys named Rolf Jansson and Marcus Persson. At some point, however, they went their separate ways, and while Rolf continued development of Wurm, Marcus, better known as Notch, went off to work on his own project, which turned out to be Minecraft. And in fact, you will find some similarities between the two. However, although many would describe Wurm as being the more mature version of Minecraft, I actually see it more as being everything that we old Ultima Online players were dreaming of, a 3D first-person version of UO. Like UO, Wurm also has a medieval setting, allowing both the PvE and PvP experience. You can claim your own plots, or better known as deeds. You can design and build houses, sail the seas, tame animals, ride mounts, and it even has a nearly identical skill system. But we'll go into all that later on. So how did I get into Wurm? Well, actually it happened about 1.5 years ago through talking about the good old days of Ultima Online with someone. I was told that if I loved UO, I would adore Wurm, and before you know it, I was setting up an account and creating my first character. Despite the clunky, outdated graphics, I immediately had this feeling that I need to give this game a chance, and I'm so glad I did too, because I haven't been this obsessed and engrossed by an MMO in a very long time. And I'd like to mention at this point that being still very new to Wurm myself, I hope the Wurm veterans out there will be patient with me if I say something which is not factual. Please feel free to correct me in the comments below. Don't get me wrong though, the first day in Wurm was daunting and tough. Everything from battling with Java to get the game to even work in the first place, all the way to trying to understand the mechanics which seemed so unfamiliar compared to the standard way of doing things in today's MMOs. The characters looked outdated, and the way they animated made me wonder if I should laugh or cry. But I decided to look past that because on the flip side, the landscapes enchanted me with their vastness and beauty. I'd never seen mountains so high in a game before, and it immediately made me want to climb one. In fact, it was curiosity and love of exploration that first got me killed. I could see an island off in the distance and felt compelled to swim towards it, only to end up drowning when I ran out of stamina. Going swimming with a backpack full of tools and heavy logs was not the best idea. That first day in Wurm was challenging in many ways. All I really wanted was to find a nice little spot on the beach and start building my first house, and during that first day I did actually succeed in this goal, but not before being poisoned to death by a scorpion, being chased by wild animals, and falling down many, many cliffs. It also didn't help that I first started out on the celebration server, which was pretty full at the time, and now looking back, it's a miracle I even found a spot to build on. These days, however, there is much more space, as a gigantic server called Xanadu has been introduced since then, and there is plenty of free land for everyone. In fact, it's on Xanadu that we're sailing right now. But yeah, after many trials and tribulations, and after about 7 hours of exploring, I finally did find a lovely little clearing in the forest and right on the seashore with a gorgeous view too. And within a few hours of that, I'd successfully built my first one-tile house. After all those challenges, the feeling of achievement was immense. And now? Well, the rest is history. These days I have my own private island in a peaceful area, nestled between 2 high peaks, and the possibilities for what I can do with my land are limitless. So how does Wurm compare to other MMOs? With so many games out there and more coming each year, what is it about Wurm that would make me, someone who has seen it all and, to be honest, a bit burned out on MMOs, what would make me want to play this instead of all those shiny new MMOs with breathtaking graphics and polished gameplay? Let me summarize the answer in one sentence. Wurm allows me to do all the things other games won't. Starting with the client itself, it's very lightweight, allowing you to multi-box, which means playing with many characters at the same time through multiple running clients. This definitely comes in handy when doing more tedious things like mining. You can stretch and scale the client window seamlessly, and the same goes for the UI components, which can be freely moved around, disabled or enabled, and scaled at any time. When logging on, you'll frequently see the game being updated with yet more improvements and content. So instead of big major updates once a year like in other games, Wurm is constantly adding new stuff in tiny bits and pieces, which is great because it feels like the developers are right there with you and engaged and motivated to improve the game. And if it sounds like logging on is a hassle due to waiting for content to download, worry not, it usually downloads in a few seconds. The game is absolutely free and anyone can create an account and get started right away. In fact, there is nothing stopping you from having a fruitful and rewarding experience without spending a single penny. While a free player cannot ride horses or drive carts, cannot sail large ships or build fancy buildings, they can, however, ride a cow, use a rowboat, and build a modest house. In fact, this is how I was playing when I first started. There are things that do cost currency, however, such as enabling premium status for your character or founding a deed. These both cost in-game silver, which can be purchased on the online store, but there is nothing stopping you from actually earning that silver in the game to fund your gaming experience. For instance, you could chop down trees or mine some rocks for someone. In fact, it's very popular for people to buy and sell raw materials or labor services from one another. That is part of what makes Wurm a thriving community of friendly players. And I know some people who actually earn enough in the game to fund their own gaming experience. Before I go into the specific features of Wurm, let's talk about the world itself. Wurm consists of several differently sized PvE and PvP servers that you can travel to either by sailing the sea right over the server border or by teleportation through magical portals. Each server is shaped completely differently, and while some servers are small enough to sail around in a few hours, others would take days to fully travel around. When a new server is created, it starts off as completely untouched wild land, filled with forests, mountains, and lakes. So everything you see which is hand-built, every building, every fence, every road, every item, they are all created by the players themselves and not the developers. Well, the developers have of course created the art assets, but the players themselves build stuff here. So, similar to Second Life in that respect. And because of this, the world is under constant change because of the effects players have on it. However, the natural elements also keep things feeling fresh. First, the game cycles through 4 seasons, changing the look and feel of familiar landscapes, so you get to experience the transformation of your environment from spring to summer, fall, and winter. And as in real life, the plants also have their cycles of producing fruit, maple syrup, and other ingredients. Second, the game also cycles with the time of day, with the sun rising and falling, allowing you to enjoy bright sunny days and atmospheric starry nights. Third, the state of the weather changes constantly, so you have sunny, cloudy, rainy, stormy, and foggy days, and snowfall in the winter as well, of course. In addition, the strength and direction of the wind also impacts your worm life, since this will affect which boat you choose to use when you go sailing. Fourth, the animals and trees are born, age, and die eventually, so even though you might have seen a huge willow tree with a unicorn standing under it last week, today there may be a bare patch of grass, and the unicorn has most likely wandered off to another area, as animals are not stuck to their spawn point, like in most MMOs. And yes, you could technically lure an animal all the way to the other side of the map, and it would actually stay there instead of rubber banding back. So, what did I mean when I said Wurm allows me to do all the things other games won't? Well, let's start with the player housing and owning land. Unlike other MMOs, if player housing even exists, housing is controlled and hidden away from the main areas in special housing zones and instances, or else there are predefined plots like in Shroud of the Avatar. However, in Wurm, the whole world is free for the taking. Well, apart from the small starting villages and the land other people have already deeded. But just because someone lives there now doesn't mean they'll be there tomorrow. For instance, I've moved 3 times now. So, go out and explore and find your perfect haven to start your home in. Seafarers will seek out spots on the shore so they can go out sailing easily. Those who want a breathtaking view over the world climb up to the peak of a mountain and make their homes there. Miners would want to instead live at the root of the mountains where they can tunnel vast mines in search of gold veins and other metals. Yet others prefer to be nestled between mountains in luscious private valleys that have forests and lakes. How about looking for your own island like me? Even if you're not lucky enough to find your own free island, you could always make one yourself. And as mentioned earlier, there is plenty of good land to go around. So, how many buildings can you have on your deed? In other MMOs it's usually just 1. In Wurm, however, it's totally up to you how many houses you want to build. It all depends on how large of an area you deeded and how big or small your buildings are. And what's best is it's all fully scalable. You can resize both your deed area and your houses at any time. Speaking of houses, most other MMOs only offer a few predefined house shapes and styles, but in Wurm you design your house from ground up. The shape, the size, the materials, how many stories, what kind of roofing, and so on. Wall by wall, floor by floor. In fact, the whole process of building a house is pretty organic and realistic. Instead of having some UI panel that lets you pick and choose walls and windows, in Wurm you build each element from scratch. That means chopping down trees, sawing planks, mining for rock shards to make bricks, mixing mortar, etc. The feeling you get once your house is complete is hugely rewarding. And yes, building a house, especially a big one, is a lot of work. So for anyone worried about making a design that sounds good in concept but ends up looking horrible, there's always the deed planner, which lets you design your house before you even start gathering resources. And if a small one-story house is good enough, it's all possible without paying a dime. Once your house is done, now comes the fun part, furnishing and decorating. You can build and craft all your own furniture, appliances, statues, dishes, tools, decorations, containers, and everything you would ever need to garnish both the inside and the outside of your home. Many items can also be dyed using ingredients found in nature, and as in Ultima Online, Wurm 2 has rare items that you can collect and show off. There is a huge selection of items to decorate with, and they can either be dropped on the ground or pushed, pulled, and rotated to get them positioned just right. One big part of home decoration is lighting. The game has many different types of candles, lamps, lanterns, braziers, and torches. If you want to get fancier than the natural light they give off, you can always dye your lamps to give off different colored light. Really cool for lighting up tunnels or event areas. Although there is a lot to decorate inside houses, there is just as much outside. For instance, guard towers, fences, market stalls, statues, and now the recently introduced bridges. How many MMOs do you know that allow players to build a bridge? And not only are there many materials and styles to choose from, but you can decide their length and width and whether they are attached to land or buildings. I really love this game. Speaking of objects, when you explore your surroundings in other MMOs, pretty much everything you see is static. The trees don't age, the houses stay put, and the decorations surrounding them have no purpose, cannot be interacted with, and never change or move. The developers of the game have created the visual content merely to fill and decorate the game with, and although a few select items such as mailboxes and crafting stations can be interacted with, pretty much everything else is merely a prop to fill the space with and to make the game look pretty. From year to year, these places look exactly the same and do not change. In Wurm, however, every single thing you see not only has some functionality and purpose attached to it, but can and will change. Things can be used, moved, pulled, pushed, rotated, picked up, terraformed, dyed, destroyed, and can decay. The Wurm landscape you see today is most likely going to be completely different in a few years. This keeps everything fresh, and exploration is a never-ending joy, unlike other games where if you've seen an area once, you're done and there's nothing more to see after that. And unlike other games where so-called items in your inventory only exist as icons, but can never actually be seen or handled physically, in Wurm, pretty much everything has a 3D model that you can drop on the ground and see with your own two eyes. Imagine the possibilities for decoration. Even things like grass. If you cut some grass, you can actually lay blades of grass on the ground. If you butcher a bear, the tooth you looted from its body is an actual 3D tooth you can see and hold. This makes Wurm hugely immersive and natural, especially since items take at least a couple of days to decay when left on the ground. However, depending on the material and quality of the item, they could be there for months. For instance, I once found an abandoned deed and decided to move there. No one had lived there for many months, and when I started cleaning up the garden, I found a couple of old rusty keys buried under the grass. One reading, "Wolves." I guess they kept wild wolves captive or something, but it certainly made that moment immersive for me and made me pause to wonder what the previous owners were like and what they were doing there. Oh, and that reminds me, like with the key named Wolves, yes, you can rename objects at any time. Role players especially would love this feature of the game. But having objects and items in Wurm doesn't end there. In fact, one of the core things to do in Wurm is to improve them using specific tools. So, after building something, say a wooden mallet, you could be perfectly happy stopping there and could use the mallet to build some simple wooden objects. Each item has its own attributes such as quality, damage, weight, and what tool is needed to improve it further. A freshly built item such as the mallet will most likely be of low quality, which would mean it would decay faster, be slower to use, and less durable during use. It would also restrict the amount of available options to build other things. Although you could build those simple wooden items such as barrels and crude furniture, you would not be able to build fancy furniture such as the intricately carved royal throne, but improving the mallet would change all that. Improving items affects them in different ways as well. For instance, the higher quality a leather saddle is, the faster the mount will run which is wearing it. Improving items is a big pastime in Wurm, not only for the above reasons, but also because it's the most efficient and powerful way to raise your skills. In fact, people organize events called impalongs, revolving around item improvement only, in which hundreds of players gather together once a year in a big hall. New players bring in their tools to be improved, and veteran crafters improve them for free and get the side bonus of raising their crafting skills some more. Everyone wins. And it's no wonder these events are so popular, because actually one of the best ways to make money in the game is by selling tools and weapons which you've improved to very high levels. I've bought quite a few tools myself because they really make life easier. For instance, one of my current projects is to mine out the mountain on my island to discover all the ore veins it contains. Well, that's a long and tedious process, and even though I do it with several alts at the same time, it's still slow. So I've bought several high-quality enchanted pickaxes for all my alts, which reduce mining time significantly. Oh, and like Ultima Online, high-quality items also show the maker's mark in the form of an inscription. A nice way to make yourself a famous artisan. So how about storing things in Wurm? Let me just ask you, In the game you're currently playing, what does your character's inventory look like? I just bet that every slot, every pouch, every backpack, and every bank vault is full up with icons you can barely decipher. Are you forced to mouse over some of them to see what they are? In Wurm, inventory is the least of your troubles. Inventory is in the form of a textual list, and how many crates, storage bins, and chests you build to store your junk is up to you. For instance, in my ship alone, I can store more than 12,000 items, and that's just in my ship. My warehouse can fit 500,000 items. Try fitting that into your WoW bank. Next, let's talk about one of my favorite MMO pastimes, exploration. What other MMO allows completely seamless exploration in a gigantic world where it takes at least a day to sail around the mainland? No instances, no zones, no artificial walls, no fake mountains or forests stopping you, no invisible walls to bump into just when you thought you reached a cool area. You can actually walk or sail over every nook and cranny of the game. So you see a mountain in the distance that beckons to be climbed? Go for it and enjoy an amazing view. You want to sail all the way into the horizon? Do it, and while you're exploring, be sure to keep a lookout for decaying and abandoned houses. If you're lucky, you'll be able to pillage the remains of one and acquire huge amounts of resources, valuable weapons and tools, and even some rare items. Anyone who played Ultima Online and enjoyed hunting houses which were in danger of collapsing can appreciate this side of Wurm as well. In fact, sometimes I go out for long sailing trips with nothing else in mind but to scout the shores with my spyglass and to spot houses that look like they're missing walls or have holes in them. Most of the time I manage to haul back tons of good stuff too. And speaking of sailing, what other MMO do you know that allows you to build your own rowboat, sailing ship or caravel and then set off sailing in a completely open and seamless sea? Go deep-sea fishing, sail to an abandoned island, hunt sea serpents or sharks, become a traveling salesman, or why not sail right on over one of the server borders? Yes, in this game not only is each server a completely unique map with a completely different looking landscape, but you can actually visit and even move to other servers by simply loading your stuff into your boat and sailing on over the server border. That is truly astonishing and unique. In fact, during my time in Wurm, I've already lived on 3 different servers and often go on long hunting trips to faraway places. It's exhilarating. Enough about the sea. How about terraforming the land? One of the best things about Wurm Online is the complete freedom to shape the land in whichever way you see fit. Is a mountain blocking your lovely view of the sea? Go ahead and surface mine it down and open up the space. Or on the flip side, build up a mountain instead. Doing it alone, it would probably take you 10 years, but technically it's absolutely possible. Alternately, you could do what I did and make a tunnel straight through an entire mountain to have easy access to whatever was on the other side. Stuck in the middle of the mainland, surrounded by forests and mountains with no water in sight, simply dig down into the earth until you reach the sea level, and voila, you've created your own lake. Tired of staring at the grass and trees? Chop those down and sprinkle sand all over to create your own desert. Irritated by your snoopy neighbors? Not to worry. Load up your ship with a gazillion crates full of dirt and sail out to your dream location in the sea. Dump it all overboard and create your own island. And speaking of land, not only do you change the landscape by shaping it and building upon it, you can also fully control what trees, plants, grass and other natural elements grow where. Is there a pesky tree blocking the road you want to build? Chop that sucker down and off you go. Is your yard looking a bit barren? Plant some shrubs, flowers, and a majestic oak tree to spruce things up. The game has many types of trees, all with their own size, look, and qualities. So while some trees, such as the apple and cherry trees, produce fruit when in season, others have qualities of strength and durability, if you build items from them. Oh, and they all give a different texture and color to the items you build out of their wood. Flowers can be picked and planted in flower pots and flower beds. Then there is farming crops. The game has a huge variety of things you can plant, such as grains, vegetables, berries, cotton, and so forth. The higher skilled you become in farming, the more your crops yield, if you tend to them well. And how about the creatures of Wurm? Animals and mobs are born, in other words spawn, into the world as babies. They age and die with time. Upon dying, a new one doesn't just pop up in the same spot. and in fact the animal you found may have spawned in some very far away place, as creatures tend to roam. So this makes the creature feel unique and have more value, as finding another may not happen easily. Many animals can be tamed, and some, such as cows and horses, can simply be led by a rope. Tamed animals can be commanded and will fight for you in battle. Mobs, such as trolls and goblins, cannot be tamed, but can be dominated and commanded to do your bidding. But in Wurm, creatures are more than just pets. In the wild you'll find wild horses, cows, pigs, chickens, sheep, and so forth, which can all be brought back to your home to keep as livestock. If you're lucky enough to find both a male and female, you can start breeding them to create a herd, and from then on you'll have an endless supply of milk, wool, meat, eggs, and leather. Each animal has its own unique traits, and the better your animal husbandry skill, the more of the traits you can recognize to make sure you're only breeding the best specimens of your stock. Need a good fighting pet? Breed animals with aggressive traits. Need a fast mount? Breed horses with many speed traits, and so on. Some animals, like horses, can also be used as mounts or hitched to a cart or wagon. Oh, and by the way, you can also brand your animals, which will show others that they belong to your deed in case one of them escapes. One of the best things about Wurm is its charm, atmosphere, and the level of immersion you experience playing it. Imagine your character waking up on a sunny day, with the birds chirping, although last night it was still dark, foggy, and raining. Imagine checking on your livestock and noticing that a baby calf was born recently, or that the trees you planted a couple weeks ago are now bearing fruit. Imagine checking on your crops to see that the corn you planted is now ripe for the picking, or that because you were too lazy to tend to them resulted in them wilting and dying. Imagine walking down the shore to do some morning fishing, only to see a neighbor or explorer sail past with a friendly wave or request for directions. Imagine going for a stroll in the forest to pick tree sprouts, only to come across a wild horse, which you could then catch with a rope and start riding it right there and then. Imagine crafting in your workshop and hearing a hammering sound in the distance. It would be a cozy way to know that your neighbor must be home now. Imagine packing your cart with wares to sell, and making a 2-hour journey through the wilderness to the local market to stock your vendors. Imagine checking your vendor and noticing that the tools you put up for sale were successfully sold, and the vendor is holding some gold for you. Imagine sailing the seas and waving to villagers working on the shores. And yes, those villagers being actual players. It happens all the time, and I could go on and on. Let's talk about the gameplay and progression. How does that compare? While we're used to the most common MMO model, which is to choose a class, decide on which crafting skills to take, decide which body attributes to support such as agility or strength, and level up your character from say 1 to 80, well, Wurm does not have classes or leveling up. Instead, gameplay revolves around improving skills. The great thing about the lack of levels is that you and your friends can play together, and you don't have to keep up or slow down your progression to do stuff together. Skills start at 1 and can be raised up to 100. This includes fighting, healing, and crafting skills. In fact, there is a total of 142 skills to choose from in the game. However, a difference from UO's skill system, where you only have a skill point pool of around 700, and which forces you to carefully plan what combination of skills you want for each character, in Wurm there are no limits, and you are free to raise every single skill if you want to. One character can be it all. There's only one exception to this, which is if you want to become a priest, in which case there are certain skills you will not be able to use. However, to compensate, as a priest you will be able to gain magical powers instead. Another major difference between Wurm and other MMOs is the base of the gameplay. In other MMOs your main goal is to level up and do quests for NPCs to get gold and gear, so you can progress to new areas, rinse and repeat until you've reached the top level and seen it all. Wurm, however, is nothing like that, and being a sandbox MMO, this game is all about you and your goals. It's about survival and finding your way in the world. As a new player, you are not restricted to newbie areas and can freely explore the lands. Even the mob spawns are not organized in any particular way. You'll find an even mixture of both easy and hard mobs everywhere. There are also no quest givers, nor is there a path of progression you are meant to follow. There are some missions, however, which players can partake in together, although I've never done them myself, so I can't tell you much. But if you look up the word mission on Wurmpedia, it will be explained there. Also, while a good part of the gameplay in something like WoW revolves around dungeoning and raiding, this is not part of the Wurm experience, unless you consider raiding in the form of a group getting together on the PvP servers to raid their enemy fortress. So, what are the players like in Wurm? Starting with age, although all age groups seem to enjoy the game, I have to say I've never seen a higher concentration of older gamers, and in fact the atmosphere is very mature and friendly indeed. Griefers do exist here as well, but this problem does not seem to be as prevalent as in other games. I think this is partially due to the fact that reputation actually matters in Wurm, since you only have one character per account, and word gets around if you're not very nice. Since a lot of trading is done in the game, ruining your reputation would not be wise, as you never know when you want to make a good trade or will need some help. Moving on to the community of Wurm. The game has a strong sense of community in many respects. People love to work together to build towns, events, and special landmarks for the game. For instance, right now there are two cool projects going on. One is a massive long highway running through the independent server, another is a labyrinth being built by the Factional Fight Brothers on Xanadu. Both groups invite everyone to take part in building these things together. It may sound like this game is only for social people, but nothing could be farther from the truth. As we know, in many MMOs solo play is not really encouraged or even possible, and for many things you are pretty much forced to work with others to get ahead. But not all of us want to be social. Some of us have busy lives and don't want to be setting up times or being a hindrance to other people. Some of us just want to log on and do our own thing. The great thing about Wurm, however, is that it offers a wonderful experience for both solo and social players alike. If you want to be a loner, you can be like me and find a faraway place to settle down in peace and quiet. Or if you're social, you can join a village and become part of a community, or set up your own village, town, or city. In fact, Wurm is a dream come true for guilds and families alike, since they have the freedom to work together to create exactly the kind of space they need. The reason I say families is because I knew this one family who lived on an island, and the kids could run rampant doing whatever they wanted without the parents having to be concerned that their kids will go out and cause havoc for other players. Kids were happy, parents were happy, and I'm quite sure the neighbors on the mainland were happy too. In addition to villages, people get together at events and markets where people buy and sell their wares. This is such a popular thing that you'll find many markets in Wurm with hundreds of vendors set up. Wurm also has a vibrant and active community on their forums, with a whole section dedicated to players' suggestions to improve the game, and in fact many of these suggestions have been implemented over the years. So how about player support? I think one of Wurm's strongest points is its help system made by Wurm players. First of all, there's Wurmpedia, Wurm's own wiki. In that you will find information on pretty much everything in the game, and the recipes on how to build things as well. There's tutorials and tips too. But if you don't find what you're looking for and you're stuck, you can then ask on the Community Assistance Help channel in the game. There's always someone around who will be happy to answer your question, no matter how dumb it is. And if they can't help you and your issue still needs help from a game master, you can write up a ticket and a GM will help you out if it's a valid issue. I can't even remember getting badly stuck with a problem in the game for very long thanks to this support system. So after all the great things I've said about Wurm, you may be wondering, how is it possible that this isn't the most popular and widely known MMO in the world? Well, being someone who loves the game so much, I'm tempted to say, good question. But actually, I can see a few reasons why this hasn't happened. First of all, advertising. Wurm is developed and run only by a handful of developers and has a very small player base, so I would imagine that their capabilities to splurge on expensive marketing campaigns is quite limited. Even though the player base is small, it's a very dedicated one, and you'll find many videos on YouTube where players do Wurm tutorials, etc. As for the player perspective on why Wurm isn't well known, well, let's start off with the client itself. It can be a hassle to get started if you're not used to dealing with Java. If you have the latest version of Java installed, most likely installing and starting up the game will go smoothly, but if not, it can get tricky. Secondly, the first impression you get when you enter the game is not too great. Wurm and Second Life share the same curse in that respect. The games are amazing, but give a much poorer first impression in the tutorial area, making many people just quit right there and then without giving the game a chance. Thirdly, for those used to using only their mouse to move around, it may feel uncomfortable to go old school with the keyboard. And don't even get me started on the characters. They look something like out of a 90s game. Very low poly, rigid, simple animations, and look very fake, especially compared to the more realistic and immersive landscapes, buildings, and animals. Also, you can only play in first-person view, thus you won't be able to see your character apart from a hand or leg waving in front of you. This, however, can be a good thing, as it does make the experience more immersive and like you yourself are the character, versus playing God over a little virtual human. You do, however, have the possibility to customize the look of your character through a one-use mirror, which is included in your inventory. Not that there are many choices, mind you. In fact, I think that if there's anything the Wurm developers need to start focusing on next, it's improving the characters. How they look, how they animate, how they emote, and how they interact with the environment. For instance, although a character can ride horses, sail ships, swim, climb and build houses, they cannot sit on chairs or lie down. The sitting part is especially aggravating to me because it makes me think that the devs do not understand the huge social impact that it has on the game. Because we cannot sit means that creating a player tavern, restaurant, theater, or arena is pretty much a useless concept. People just don't feel comfortable or immersed when standing around. They feel restless, like they need to go someplace. And may I point out that the aforementioned player establishments are one of the most popular ways for players to get together in, say, Ultima Online. And how about having a neighbor or friend come over? We now have gorgeous chairs and benches and crackling fireplaces to sit around and engage in long, cozy chats. But, oh yeah, we can't sit, can we? So that means that if someone visits and our characters are just standing there, we'll feel fidgety, and the visit will probably be a short one, with the guest feeling obligated to move on and out of our hair. Devs sitting. Please think about it. Next, the tutorial area is not very engaging or intuitive. Many players will be confused about what to do or where to go next. I think the previous tutorial was much better in that respect. If someone does manage to finally find their way to the portal to choose a server, they may be confused upon arriving in one of the starter villages. Where are the quest givers? What do I kill? Where do I go next? Wurm is not like other MMOs in that respect. As I was describing before, your first goal is basically to survive. For instance, go out and find a place to build a small house or tunnel a cave into some rock for your first base of operations and shelter. Once you have that set up, make a forge and anvil so you can start making better tools, armor, and weapons. Alternately, you could of course join someone's village and start your Wurm life under the protective wing of other players who will be more than happy to help you get started. And don't be shy about asking about this either. People love to have new players join and live in the villages and towns they build. I guess they love to see it grow and thrive. Also, those who assume that they will start off in a safe newbie area with non-aggressive weak mobs will be sorely disappointed to notice that whacking a wolf on its head will result in instant death. Wurm does not have a safe area in that respect. Instead, newbies have a special spell that makes them less noticeable or attractive to aggressive animals for the first 24 hours, if I remember correctly. So, at least there's that. Other games also start off with a lot of fast pace and action. Wurm is anything but fast-paced. Things happen slowly and carefully here, which is great for those of us who prefer a slower pace anyhow. I never was able to keep up with others in MMOs like WoW in, say, a battle situation, and having to make decisions quickly stressed me out. In general, Wurm may not be for people who are impatient. Things take time, a lot of effort, and a lot of patience to complete here. Gratification is not instant in this game, and to arrive at your goal you will have most likely had to go through many trials and errors first. But upon succeeding in whatever you were aiming for, the feeling of achievement cannot even be described. It's truly rewarding and immense. The last game I felt those kinds of feelings was Ultima Online, where it took me a year to be a good enough animal tamer to tame my first dragon. And it's memories like that that I cherish the most. The short-tempoed goals and victories had in other MMOs just don't feel as rewarding or memorable, since the journeys to complete those goals are usually short ones. I can easily remember the great moments of achievement in Ultima Online or in Wurm, but I cannot remember anything much from, say, WoW. Well, apart from finally finding a rare pet to tame. I mean, sure, there are some long-term goals in WoW, however the fact that they have been designed by someone other than myself makes them less memorable than the stuff I designed for myself. Another thing that may be disappointing for some players is the lack of rich backstory for the game and the lack of NPCs with special personalities. You won't find anything like that here. Instead, the players themselves become the legends, and the things they've achieved become the stories passed down from one generation of Wurmians to the next. Also, although some enjoy the soundtrack of Wurm, I personally can't bear to listen to it and have turned it off, as it lessens my feeling of immersion and engagement. I feel it doesn't really suit a medievally themed setting such as this. In fact, because of Wurm's lack of atmospheric music, I felt compelled to make a MMO adventuring playlist on Spotify. I'll include the link in the description. Lastly, if you're the kind of player who gets their main enjoyment out of killing stuff, Wurm may not be for you. Unlike other MMOs where your first task is to usually kill 5 rats or something like that, in Wurm you could not even kill the weakest of animals or mobs on your first day. It will take time to gain some strength, to practice your skills on a training dummy, and to gear up before even attempting to kill a rat. I've now been playing 1.5 years, and I can just kill a wolf alone, but for instance a giant scorpion or spider would be way too hard. But once you do start to gain the skills, you will gradually start to be able to go on longer and more dangerous hunting trips and kill bigger things. Being with a group of friends or neighbors helps as well. So yes, you can kill stuff in Wurm, but it's not the first thing you would start doing. I've pretty much gone through everything I can think of, but I'm sure there's much more that I don't even know about yet. For instance, PvP. It opens up a whole different aspect of the game, and I'm sure that there would be a lot to discuss concerning religions and priesthood in Wurm, but since I don't know about those things, I can't really say much. So to wrap this up, if you're an MMO player who loves freedom, who loves choices, who wants to be able to do their own thing and completely control their environment, who loves crafting and building, who loves honing skills, who loves exploration and appreciates making their own goals, and in general, if you loved the things that I was describing earlier in this video, and they sounded good to you, then you'll love Wurm, and I warmly recommend you give it a try. Maybe watch some videos on YouTube as well. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it succeeded in giving you a better idea of what this game is about. Welcome to Wurm Online.